There are a ton of new players back in that you can actually consider starting this week. Guys like George Kittle, Rashee Rice, and then maybe even Mike Evans. We'll cover every start-sit question that you have with this video. Starting off with the S tier, we have Bijan, CMC, Jonathan Taylor, JSN, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jefferson, as well as CD Lamb. It's super simple. If you have any of these players, you put them in your lineup. Don't bother asking about it. Going over to our next tier, we are going to have Josh Jacobs leading us off. I mean, with Jacobs, he is quietly one of the elite players in fantasy football at the moment, averaging 20.9 fantasy points per game. Over the past few weeks, he's done this as a receiver as well as a rusher, where this past week against Cincinnati, he had 23 total opportunities. The week prior against Dallas, he had 26. The week before that against Cleveland, he had 25. This is with him averaging over 50 receiving yards a game over the past 3 weeks. This is with him coming through as a rusher and averaging about 70 rushing yards per game. And he's had back-to-back performances over 30 fantasy points. This matchup here is actually going to be pretty easy as well, going against the Arizona Cardinals, where you are pretty heavily favored in this game and you have an implied team total of almost 26 points. Now, going over to Jahmyr Gibbs, he hasn't been nearly as compelling as Jacobs so far this season, where he's averaging 4 points per game fewer. You also have Campbell coming through saying that they want to split the backfield even more between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. This matchup against Tampa, though, has an over-under of like 52.5 points, and you do have the Detroit Lions currently projected to be the highest scoring offense of the week with an implied team total slightly over 29. Devon Achane at the moment has a very interesting setup against the Cleveland Browns. The Miami Dolphins have an implied team total of only 17.5 points, which is very, very low. I believe the only offenses that's going to be ahead of this week will be the Raiders and the Giants. So Miami projects to be a bottom 3 offense, and it's a really tough matchup going up against the Cleveland Browns. And then you sprinkle on the fact that the weather actually looks like it may be a disaster in Cleveland. It's very scary for Achane. Now, I will say, because the weather's going to be bad, they probably just have to run the ball consistently. And we know that Achane is going to be getting a ton of these dump offs. If the wind is crazy, hell, it's not going to be a problem throwing it 5 yards. Where the problem is maybe is throwing it 20 plus. And looking at Achane, I mean, right now on Underdog Fantasy, they currently have him projected at higher, lower 100.5 total yards, which is much higher than anybody else in this tier. Drake London's higher lower 75.5 on Underdog right now. He has an implied team total 23 points. He's the wide receiver 7 in fantasy points per game with 17.3. A lot is up in the air, and if Darnell Mooney is going to be playing or not this week. If Darnell Mooney does play, London probably falls below Davante Adams. Adams, you're for sure having no Puka Nacua in this game. If Puka played, I would be shocked. And right now with Davante Adams, he projects out this week to probably see 35% of the Rams targets. And sportsbooks are telling us that we shouldn't expect the Rams offense to be a disaster by any stretch of the imagination. They have an implied team total of almost 24 points here against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Then with Rome Odunze, I don't know the status of DJ Moore just yet, but realistically, if you're going to have no DJ Moore, you can move Rome up this list. If DJ Moore doesn't play, you can move him down. Kyron Williams alongside Davante Adams is going to be in a really good spot, and that you're just going to get the consistent work between these two players and these two players alone with no Puka Nacua. So the offense is going to be extremely concentrated, and Kyron's averaging already 17 points per game. And like we said, sportsbooks are telling us that they should be able to put points on the board. And then Nico Collins as the last player in this tier hasn't really been great this season, while at the same time, you actually do have the Houston Texans projected out to be one of the worst offenses in the league this week. The only offenses that I see with worse projections at the moment, again, would be the Raiders, the Giants, and then what we talked about previously with the Miami Dolphins. Now, moving over to our next tier, we are going to have Javonte Williams at 16. Projections actually like Judkins and Barkley for more total yards than Javonte. Like right now, Underdog Fantasy has Javonte higher lower 85.5, Barkley higher lower 91.5, and Quinshon Judkins higher lower 100.5 total yards. The reason I'm going to give Javonte the nod is, one, the touchdown upside. This game has the highest over-under of any game that you're going to find this week. And honestly, the highest over-under of any game that we've seen so far this season at 54.5 points. The second thing is Javonte actually has had a phenomenal role as a receiving running back so far this season, averaging about 4.7 targets per game. I'm starting Saquon Barkley as the running back 1 on my own team this week. Really hoping he pulls through for us. I would really love to move to 6-1 and yet again be the number 1 team in my league standings. But with Barkley, you haven't had the big plays. He's averaging fewer than 15 points per game and has yet to have a game where he's actually scored 20 points. And then moving over to Quinshon Judkins, this is the dream matchup going up against the Miami Dolphins. So again, if you were looking at the underdog projections, they have Judkins higher, lower, 100.5 total yards. I think a big reason with this as well is if the weather's bad, they're just going to run the ball over and over again. And this Miami Dolphins rush defense is possibly the worst rush defense that we have seen in the NFL in quite some time. Now, of course, if you disagree, if you think, oh, there's no way Judkins hits 100 yards, I'm going to go with the lower than Judkins 100. Or, oh, I really think Javonte's going to have more than 85. You can find all of those projections and all those picks on Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the #1 app in the App Store at the moment. And the reason is they're available in every state. They're an incredible app, and they're running the biggest promos of anybody you'll find. If you use code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog Fantasy, you're going to get $100 added to your account after you play your first 5. Plus, you'll get a free Michael Penix pick, higher, lower, half a total yard for Sunday's game. And you'll get free questions that you can ask me in the live streams. And I'm live streaming every single day until Christmas, answering your free fantasy football questions. The link's in the description, the link's in the comment section. Code FLOCK will give you all those promos and available in almost every state. Now, moving over to Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice was our lock of this century on Underdog early this week, higher than 48.5 receiving yards. Y'all know I'm an idiot, so very rarely will I say, oh, I know more ball than Underdog. We know this is going to work. Now it's gotten moved. Every single time I check in, it's just up, 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 up. He's now higher, lower, 64.5 receiving yards. It seems a lot more reasonable. I'm no longer going to come out here and say that you need to slam the higher, but you do need to put him in your starting lineup with zero hesitation. They told us that Rashee Rice is not going to be limited whatsoever coming in here. Then looking over at George Pickens. George Pickens actually projects out much worse now that you have CeeDee Lamb coming back into this offense. I would still start him regardless. He's the wide receiver 5 in fantasy points per game, and he's averaging 20.1. And like I said, this game has an over-under of 54.5 points. So I think you want to start as many players in it as you possibly can. Now, I was shocked to see the Breece Hall projections. Breece Hall right now is higher, lower, 96.5 total yards. And obviously, you have no Garrett Wilson, so you assume they're going to have to lean on the run. Plus, you have a phenomenal matchup going up against the Carolina Panthers. And you know that Breece can get involved as a receiver. So, a big issue that you can see last week with Breece Hall in Europe was the fact that you just simply didn't have anything when it came to his receiving involvement, but I think that they're going to make that right, especially knowing that you have no Wilson. You don't really have another option. Now, moving over to Rachaad White. Rachaad White, must-start player in my mind. It's maybe not the best matchup that you would ever have going up against the Lions. Obviously, the Lions have a respectable defense, but you have an implied team total here for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 23.3 points. So the offense should be able to put points on the board. You have no Bucky, you have no Igbuka, you have no Godwin, so they desperately need playmakers. The only hesitation that you have is Detroit's heavily favored in this game, so there's a chance that the run gets away from them, but Rachaad White's a capable receiver anyway. And then Travis Etienne will be the next running back that I'm starting for my own team. A spread on this game's like 3 points, so the Jacks can stay in it. They can run the ball. Etienne's been boring. He's the RB18 in points per game at 14.2. We've seen him get squeezed for red zone rushing touchdowns by both Byshell Tuten as well as Trevor Lawrence. We've seen freaking LaQuint Allen, a player that I didn't even know before this season, out there taking third down usage, which just pisses me the hell off as a Travis Etienne owner. So I hope Etienne expands his role, but it's not looking super promising. And then the first player I'm putting in my flex spot this week is going to be Cam Skattebo. Skattebo actually over the past 3 weeks has been incredible. If you're going through and looking at week 4, the dude had 27 opportunities. And week 5, he has 22 opportunities. And week 6, he had 21 opportunities. But this matchup against the Denver Broncos is really tough. It's in Denver. While I understand we all want to sit here and we all want to say like, oh, okay. All of a sudden, the New York Giants are a great offense with Jackson Dart balling against the Philadelphia Eagles in a Thursday night game everybody watches. The fact of the matter is sportsbooks have the Giants as the lowest scoring offense in the league this week. I don't know if the Thursday Night Magic's going to carry over. I still think that this is a bad team. This is a bad offense. I hope I'm wrong. I'm starting Cam Scattaboo. But again, I have offensive concerns, especially in this matchup. Now, our next name will be Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt's actually higher, lower, like 89.5 total yards on Underdog at the moment. So if you were just ranking based off the Underdog pick'em projections, like you would have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt way higher than like the 10 guys I have ahead of him. My holdup and why I'm going to be ranking him lower is, while this is a phenomenal matchup going up against the Dallas Cowboys, we still have had no role as a receiver whatsoever this year. The dude has 0 games with more than 2 targets. And so far this season, he's averaging 1.3 targets and 10 receiving yards. So if you're a running back that has no receiving involvement, you're a touchdown or bust player. Now, of course, you can say like, oh, okay, well, there have been running backs in the past with no receiving involvement that have absolutely crushed. Look at Derrick Henry. Like, how many Derrick Henrys come around? So it's a phenomenal matchup for JCM. I'd be happy to continue to move him up our rankings if he continues to ball. I know y'all screamed at me for having him, quote unquote, too low in the rankings last week. And last week he scored 5.8 points against the Chicago Bears, which is always the concern with the running backs that don't catch the ball. Again, if they don't score a touchdown, it's GG's. Now, our next name is going to be DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is heavily favored against the New Orleans Saints, but he did pop up on the injury report on Thursday with the groin. I'm recording this as about noon on Friday morning, so we have yet to see the practice report from DeAndre Swift yet. But if DeAndre Swift is going to be out there practicing in full, you have no concerns whatsoever. It's a spot in which he will have the receiving role. He'll have first and second down usage in a game in which the Chicago Bears are heavily favored and can run the ball in the second half. Now, Ashton Jeanty, I understand, is going to seem very low in these rankings to a lot of people. But we got to be realistic with ourselves. Y'all know, I mean, we called Ashton Jeanty that buy low candidate after the first few weeks when he looked like he wasn't even going to be a top 24 RB. And he's posted 3 straight weeks of him pretty much being a running back 1 in fantasy, averaging over 20 points per game. So I'm rooting for our guy Jeanty here. I think he's an elite player. The issue that you have is this game is in Kansas City. It's the largest spread of the week. This Chiefs defense is a very tough matchup. So yes, Ashton Jeanty is going to be ranked a lot higher in my rankings going into the future. But in this one spot, I'm concerned about the touchdown upside. Not only am I concerned about the touchdown upside, but on top of that, I'm going to be concerned if you see him scale back with the receiving involvement closer to what we had in the first 3 weeks. He's only had 1 game with more than 17 receiving yards. So I don't know if he has a super safe floor. I'm still starting him regardless because obviously sportsbooks could always be wrong. The Raiders could go out there and win this game, or they could just play it close. Now, Jalen Waddle will be our next name. I want to move Waddle lower in these rankings if the weather's going to be very bad. Again, Waddle has looked like a consistent must-start option ever since you had the injury to Tyreek Hill. But this is in Cleveland. The Miami Dolphins project to be the 2nd worst offense in the league this week. And again, the weather looks like it could be a disaster. So make sure you're monitoring this when it comes to Jalen Waddle. There's a chance he goes lower in our rankings, but the Underdog projections have him at higher, lower 62.5 receiving yards this week, which is right in line with some of these other guys. Like you have Brian Thomas, higher, lower 65.5. Brian Thomas, obviously, get the big breakout this past week, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 90 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. The best game that you've had so far this season. Playing against the Los Angeles Rams should be a competitive contest, as we talked about previously. If Deebo Samuel was fully healthy, Deebo Samuel, realistically, I don't think he would definitely want to be an S tier player for me. But if Deebo Samuel was fully healthy, he would be in A tier for me. He would be right there with Devon Achane, Drake London, Devontae Adams. Because this is the best matchup you could possibly ask for. Again, the Commanders have an implied team total of 28.5 points. This should be one of the highest scoring offenses in the league this week. Right there with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Detroit Lions. The only holdup I have is Deebo didn't practice on Wednesday. He didn't practice on Thursday. It's the same thing that happened last week. So it looks like this heel injury is very serious. And at the same time, you got to go ahead and we have to look at the fact that this past week with the heel injury, like Deebo really fell flat in what should have been a good spot against Chicago, only scoring 5.5 points. So I'm worried that he's limited by this injury, but realistically, you still probably got to start him regardless. And then Ladd McConkey, we're going to move up our rankings for the reason being is this dude's projections are insane. How the hell is he higher, lower 65.5 receiving yards? Like, it feels like the lower on this is a lock. I want to sit here and I want to say like, hey, Quentin Johnston is still the wide receiver 1. He truly is. Blah, blah, blah. He's going to make my bags print. But if I'm looking at the hamstring injury for Quentin Johnston, where we don't know if he's 100%, then you sprinkle on the fact that the projections love Ladd McConkey, and Ladd McConkey is coming off the best game of his season. You may just have to go through and you may just have to say play Ladd. Now, moving down to our next tier, we are going to have Courtland Sutton leading us off. With Sutton, yes, it was a very tough spot last week. He very much disappointed going up against Sauce Gardner. Still, he's averaging 13.9 fantasy points per game. He's still the wide receiver 20 in points per game. And this matchup against the Giants is one in which you do actually have the Denver Broncos favored by about a touchdown. So I would just play Sutton if I had him. Then Tetairoa McMillan, he has to go up against Sauce Gardner, the same tough matchup that Sutton drew last week. It's not like the Jets defense has been phenomenal, though. We know that the Panthers are going to try to run the ball with the two-headed monster that they now may have. But Tetairoa McMillan still's been sitting here with the very consistent target share. He has 8 targets per game so far this season. And obviously, I'm going to assume that the rookie continues to get better as time goes on. Chris Olave has been, really circling in NFL trade rumors. I will say Olave, as it stands right now in New Orleans, is averaging over 32% of his team's targets. Like, he's at the very top of the NFL with his target share. He's been super inefficient. It hasn't been the best quarterback play, but if you play in a full PPR league, you probably just have to go ahead and start him. Quentin Johnston was at practice on Wednesday. He was at practice on Thursday. I'm assuming he's going to be at practice on Friday. We'll see if he practices in full on Friday. If he does, then at that point, what I'll probably do is I'll probably go ahead and move Ladd McConkey down these rankings and move Quentin Johnston up them. Mike Evans, we'll see what the status is. If he plays in this game, it seems like you would be a fool to put him on your bench. Because again, you actually do have this game with an over-under of almost 53 points. We are pretty damn confident that there's no shot you are getting Chris Godwin, you're getting Igbuka, you're getting Bucky Irving, so they need playmakers. They're going to need to throw the ball in this kind of matchup. So I would love to get Mike Evans in the lineup. He did get in a limited practice on Thursday. We'll see what the Friday practice report is. So with Rico Dowdle, the projections nuked him once you had Chuba Hubbard playing. And you go through and you look at what this coaching staff is saying. They're saying that it doesn't matter who has the first touch because both running backs are going to be heavily involved. And the concern that I have with this is that the Carolina Panthers turn into the Seattle Seahawks with their running backs, where both running backs are involved. Maybe it helps the team, but it does nothing for our actual fantasy football teams, where both running backs eat. They both do just enough where you don't cut them, but also they don't help your starting lineup whatsoever. So I am worried about Rico Dowdle. Jordan Mason, tough matchup that you have going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. But realistically, you probably want to go ahead and you probably just jam them in until you get Aaron Jones. But the receiving involvement's not great, of course. Now, moving over and looking at A.J. Brown. With Brown, if you look at his targets since week 2, the dude's had like 8 targets every single game at the very minimum. I don't want to come through and I don't want to say like, oh, okay, it's all A.J. Brown's fault that he's not producing. I know a lot of these targets are inaccurate. I know some of these are throwaways, blah, blah, blah. You actually have seen the Philadelphia Eagles slide a bit with their implied team total in this game, where now they're sitting at an implied team total of 22.5 points and only favored over the Minnesota Vikings by 1.5 points. Now, our next option will be Michael Pittman Jr. Pittman will rise once we officially get Josh Downs listed as out. Downs did not practice on Wednesday, did not practice on Thursday with the concussion. The hope is that Downs gets in a Friday practice. If that does happen, Michael Pittman Jr. is a little bit less exciting. But if Downs misses, I think I would move Pittman ahead of Brown. I'd probably move him to the very top of C tier and maybe to the bottom of B tier, to be honest. Now, J.K. Dobbins still the starting running back for the Denver Broncos until we see otherwise. He's still very much a touchdown or bust running back because he's not going to get involved as a receiver whatsoever. We've seen that so far this season. But playing against the New York Giants, where you're like touchdown favorites, realistically, you could see him go out there and just run the ball over and over and over again. Alvin Kamara will be our next name. With Kamara, it's a game environment in which the Saints are actually supposed to move the ball down the field. Like, they have an implied team total of 21 points here. Kamara's higher, lower, 70.5 total yards on Underdog. Like, the receiving involvement has kind of returned, where over the past 3 weeks, he's had 16 targets. But you do have Taysom Hill stealing rushing touchdowns now. And obviously, Kamara's sitting here screaming that if he gets traded, he's going to retire, which, why the hell do you want to play for the New Orleans Saints so bad? Our next guy will be Kamani Vidal. With Vidal, he looks like he's the starting running back in Los Angeles. Again, I don't necessarily think he's like a super talented player, if we're going to be honest with each other. I think the offensive line is decimated at this moment. This matchup against the Indianapolis Colts isn't the best. Now, I will say you actually do have decent projections for the Chargers with an implied team total of 25 points. And Vidal is higher, lower, 74.5 yards on Underdog. Now, Keenan Allen will be our next name. If you are looking at Keenan Allen, I'd be a lot more excited if you have no Quentin Johnston. If Johnston does officially play, Keenan probably does move down this list just a bit, which obviously I'll be live streaming literally every single day until kickoff. So just make sure you're subscribed and you can come out and get updates with injuries. Then looking at Xavier Worthy, Xavier Worthy's like higher, lower, 47.5 yards on Underdog right now. Like, they have Xavier Worthy as somebody that you want to be benching for sure with Rashee Rice coming in. And it's not like Worthy's been great so far this year. His best game, he had 17 fantasy points. He had 10.5 this past week against Detroit, 11.1 against Jacksonville 2 weeks back. I was actually very excited about Xavier Worthy coming into the season, but it just hasn't really worked out. And this is also probably a game in which the Chiefs can run the ball. Now, Stephon Diggs, I currently have in my starting lineup as my wide receiver 2. And with this, I'm hoping he gets back to what he had done in week 4 and week 5 against Carolina and Buffalo, where he had back-to-back games with over 100 receiving yards. But clearly the usage is not consistent here for Diggs, which is a massive concern. However, obviously Drake May looks great. Devonta Smith, I would still have A.J. Brown ahead of him, but I mean, the gap between these players clearly is closing in my rankings. I have them in the same tier. I will say if you're looking at Underdog projections, however, they have a massive gap between the players. They, for whatever reason, have A.J. Brown higher, lower, 59.5 total yards. Smith down at only 47.5. But Smith has actually been averaging more points per game this year. Wan'Dale Robinson, I definitely think you can consider playing. I'm not going to tell you that like you need to start Wan'Dale, because the issue that you have, again, going back to it, is while I understand we all want to get excited based off the fact that the Giants looked great against the freaking Philadelphia Eagles on Thursday night, realistically, you do have them projected to be the worst offense in the NFL this week. So if that is the case, I want to be hesitant. Jordan Addison is like higher, lower, 41.5 total yards at the moment. Again, if you're not super excited about Jefferson in this offense, where it's not like Jefferson's producing to the same level that we've seen in the past, it's hard to get there with Addison. I understand he's had 2 games in which he's produced based off of essentially just 2 plays. Then going over and looking at Terry McLaurin. McLaurin did not practice on Wednesday or Thursday. If he were to play, you'd probably get me suckered into starting him just because, again, this is a really, really good matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. But if he doesn't practice on Friday, don't count on him playing. Then Jameson Williams is going to be our next name. With JMO, the Lions project to be the highest scoring offense in the league this week. Implied team total over 29 points. But it is not the easiest spot to ever get excited about him, knowing that realistically, you do just have such a low floor where he can come out any given week and give you 2 points. Jacoby Myers didn't practice early in the week, got back at practice on Thursday. I'm assuming he practiced on Friday. There are a lot of trade rumors surrounding Myers, who, remember, was requesting a trade before the season started, which is what terrified me of him. So if, like, we've gone around and around and around with Myers. Coming into this season, I was terrified. They drafted Jack Bech. They drafted Deonta Thornton. Myers requested a trade. New quarterback, new coaching staff. It's like, okay, what the hell are we expecting? Then week 1, he scores 17.7 points against New England with 10 targets, 97 receiving yards. And I'm like, oh, okay, I was all wrong. I should have just stuck with our guns here. Myers has been an absolute bum. 4 straight games with fewer than 10 fantasy points. He always does perform well against the Chiefs, though, and you have no Bowers, and they're probably going to have to throw the ball. But he's been horrendous. David Montgomery, honestly, I think you could put higher if you want, if you think David Montgomery scores a touchdown. But Montgomery hasn't been involved at all as a receiver. This matchup against Tampa, again, you have the Lions favored by about 6 points. But Montgomery's averaging 13 receiving yards per game at this moment. Kenneth Walker hasn't been used at all as a receiver. He looks like the better running back between him and Charbonnet, but that's not saying much. It's not like Kenneth Walker's been great. And he's averaging 10.1 receiving yards at the moment. And this matchup against Houston, you actually do have this game with a very low over-under. Then Ramondre Stevenson will be our last running back in this tier. Maybe I'm just a Ramondre hater. Maybe you say he needs to be way higher, just given the fact that if you go through and if you look at this setup, you're playing against the Tennessee Titans. You're massive favorites. You are the starting running back. You played 70% of the snaps this past week with no Antonio Gibson. But this dude has had 2 games scoring more than 5.1 fantasy points this year. How the hell could I ever tell you to get him in your starting lineup? Then with Romeo Doubs, Matthew Golden, I would still prefer Doubs over Golden, given the fact that you do have more red zone utilization. I wouldn't be super excited about playing either guy, though, because we know that they just spread the ball out so much, while at the same time, you do have Josh Jacobs as just the hammer for this offense. In a game, they should be able to run the ball. Isaiah Pacheco projects out very well in this matchup against the Raiders. He's higher lower of 59.5 total yards, which is actually like massive in comparison to Jordan Addison, higher lower at 41.5. Coming off a game in which he had 15 opportunities. You'd want to say like, oh, Pacheco's going in the right direction. You want to start Isaiah Pacheco. Then you see the fact that he's averaging 7 points per game this year. He's the RB 47. So it's a great matchup for Pacheco. The usage is trending in the right direction, but how the hell could you ever get excited about playing him? With Chuba Hubbard, I'd be super excited to tell you to start him, but realistically, how could we when Rico Dowdle's looked like the best player in the NFL over the past 2 weeks? They're telling us they're going to split the backfield 50-50, but realistically, I think I would play Dowdle hesitantly and then just bench Chuba Hubbard. I mean, Hubbard, it would be a really tough player to get in. But I mean, we just did see the Pittsburgh Steelers have Kenneth Gainwell put up a game that was better than anything Jalen Warren had ever done. And then they went right back to Jalen Warren. Then our next name is going to be Kendrick Bourne. You have no Pearsall. Jennings is banged up. Bourne's gone back-to-back games with 142 receiving yards. But you do have George Kittle coming back, which is going to be the concern for me personally. Then looking at Jerry Jeudy, I have him on my bench. The targets are there, especially with no David Njoku, but realistically, I don't want anything to do with Jeudy. I don't want anything to do with Shaheed, DJ Moore, Jawan Jennings. Last tier of guys I want nothing to do with will be Trevion Henderson, Zach Charbonnet, and I think we had ranked Bam Knight way too high earlier in the week. We have since corrected this with our rankings. Bam Knight's currently higher lower, 34.5 total yards on Underdog. Horrible matchup against the Green Bay Packers. You don't even know if it's going to be Bam Knight or Michael Carter. And then we'll have Woody Marks, Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb as 3 players I don't want to start. I don't want anything to do with the Texans backfield where it's just a massive committee. You have a tough matchup against Seattle and horrible projections for this offense. But I think that's all I got for y'all. I really appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. Of course, if you want to check out any of those projections, go higher or lower, you can find them on Underdog Fantasy. Links in the description, links in the comment section. Underdog is #1 in the App Store at the moment for 3 reasons. 1, incredible app. 2, available in almost every state. And 3, they're running the best promos in the business, where if you use code FLOCK, you're going to get $100 out of your account after you play your first 5. And on top of that, you're going to be getting a free Michael Penix pick, higher, lower, half a total yard for the Sunday game. And you'll get free questions that you can ask me in the live streams that I'm live streaming every single day until Christmas, answering your free questions. But I think that's all I got for y'all. I really appreciate you and really hope I get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.